Hi, Chris. Where are
Oh,
you? Can you tell me?
I am right outside the Arboretum Center right
Uh-huh.
now, and I'm at our bird feeder. Oh, and it just took off. So we have a red-breasted nuthatch coming to the bird feeder. So yeah, we're live at the Arboretum Center bird feeder, where hopefully we'll get some action while we talk today.
Thanks so much for agreeing to meet me outside.
Yeah, hey,
So
no
maybe
problem.
I'll just remind the listeners, the viewers, why we're here. Catherine Bush invited us to participate in a conversation, part of Imagining Climates, climate conversations with practitioners from across disciplines. And so I thought it would be good to talk with you. I know that neither of us are experts at, climate research and climate conversations. But I know from my own experience that talking about one specific and even small thing can open up language and ideas and conversations about many larger things. And so I thought we might talk about birds. Any birds back zooming with us?
Yeah, so the red-breasted nuthatch is. Oh, it must have taken off when I turned around. I'll stand like this, so then that way we can
I'll
see them.
let you know. I'll let you know. Is this the first time we're zooming with the birds at the feeder?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And what I've done too is I have a bunch of bird seed here, and the feeder's empty, which you think isn't good. But if the chickadees show up, um, and I can hear them in the distance, I'm going to see if I can call them in, because then I might be able to get them to land on my hand while we're talking.
okay.
So chickadees, everyone knows they make a chickadee dee dee sound, but their song is actually so cheeseburger. I'm just going to see if I can get them to come over here.
You've already aroused the interest of my cats in Toronto.
Nice. I can hear one over there. Oh, oh, that was the red-breasted nuthatch came in. So the chickadees they're closer. So we'll see if they come over. Anyway, sorry.
No,
It's going to be one of those like interrupt the talk all the time.
absolutely.
Birds don't do what they're supposed to do.
That's great. That's
Sorry.
great. Maybe we should informally introduce ourselves. I
Sure.
can begin just letting everyone know that I'm a professor teaching in studio arts at the University of Guelph, and I'm an artist. And a lot of my own artistic practice and research is involving animals, plants, fungi, nature, and I'm really interested broadly in contemporary environmental art. Can you tell us a little about what you do at the Arboretum?
Yeah, so I'm the interpretive biologist and education coordinator here. So that means that I'm in charge of educating people from preschoolers to retirees. I do lots of work with undergraduate students, graduate students, as well as school age kids. So I get to do sort of a nice wide range of ages, and my whole job is to connect people to nature. So whether that's a general group coming to visit, or a fourth year ornithology lab where they're learning how to band birds or that type of thing. So it's a great way of connecting people, but also getting people to learn science without them really realizing that they're learning a whole bunch of science.
I think that's why over the years, the difference between being a biologist and an interpretive biologist, like how do you characterize what the interpretive part is? Like, what does that involve?
Right. So it's a little bit. So I'm going to try. We'll see if we can get this to work. So we have chickadee right here. So I'm going to see. I'm going to stand here while I talk and see if it comes down to my hand while I'm sort
That
of
would be like a good trick,
but
yeah.
it's I don't know if you can see it up there sitting on the edge of the feeder, sort of wanting one of these sunflower seeds. Um, yeah, so the interpretive biologist part is it's sort of, I mean, everyone knows about nature, and a lot of people think they really understand nature, but without some type of science sort of outlook, there's a lot of details about nature that people often miss out on. And so I'm like an interpreter. So where you may be using someone to understand what someone who's speaking another language is saying, I'm sort of doing that for these birds or the plants or, like the mammals, the insects, all that type of thing. So I'm trying to get people to understand that there are other things that you can do to get connected to nature that you may not have understood before.
Yeah, yeah. When I hear interpretive biologist, it makes me think of interpretive dance, which looks like something that you might
Right.
be doing right now.
Yes, everyone is always like, oh, so are you gonna, yeah, just so we're gonna, yeah, do some kind of weird balancing thing.
Well,
Um,
I mean, what you're doing right now is what you do. So
yeah.
um, it's why you're a kind of, rock star on campus, and my students all meet you and want to be interpretive biologists by the time we leave,
Oh, it's a
because they
pretty,
think of you as a performer, right? This is a
right.
kind of practice that extends the
It
reach.
is very like edutainment, you're trying to get people to understand stuff. Oh, chickadee almost came down to my hand. You're trying to get people to understand stuff by um, being completely open about doing silly things like standing in front of a computer, balancing it on your hand while a whole flock of chickadees wants to come and land on your hand to get that sunflower seed. You can't be um, you can't have a big ego. Let's put it that way. But yeah, no interpretive dancing from me, I'm afraid, that we don't want to scare everything
But
away.
exactly what you're saying, that, being willing to immerse yourself, reach out across species to look absurd and silly and experiment and play outdoors in this environment is exactly the kind of thing I try and teach my students as a way of being artists and as a way of doing artistic research. And so, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and show
Yep,
you a couple of pictures. Actually,
sure,
maybe
that'd be
before I
great.
do that, I'll just tell you where these pictures are from. So
Okay,
I'm very, very excited. A book that I just published with my partner, Amish Morel, called Outdoor School is going to be available in the next few weeks in May, anywhere
very
from.
exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And a big part of this book, which documents about 10 years of environmental art practices that we've participated in and collaborated around, just watching the birds as we do this, we also included the works of a whole bunch of other Canadian and Indigenous artists who work in these kinds of ways. And many of the artists we focused on are doing things called relational or social practice art, things involving groups of people, events, activities, site responsive practices. And so I have some pictures here, maybe I can show you while you're birding, of students in the Arboretum. I'm gonna share my screen so that this is a little less clumsy, and give you an example of some of the things my students have been doing, for example, in the Arboretum. Let me find them here. Can you see this now? Yeah, this looks good.
Yes, yes.
So look at these wonderful images from years
Oh,
gone.
that's awesome. Hey, I hear him. That's me.
I've always been so grateful that you've let me come and bring art students to the Arboretum. I know that you work with ornithology students and zoology students and kids in their science, doing their science curriculum. You've never really questioned why I needed to bring artists there and why none of us had sketchbooks while we were there. But I think I identified some things that you do in the Arboretum as a biological interpreter, again, like between these disciplines in a way. And I came to learn, like when talking to my students, that they, by and large, like the majority of them had really, really low nature literacy. Like I taught a class called Outdoor School to artists. And one of my students said, he just started like walking around his condo. This is his new thing, his like hiking. It was like he's walking around his condo. My students, one student did a presentation on like potting a plant, and I was just bewildered by this. I just didn't understand how this was much of anything. And I polled the class. They'd never planted anything in their life. And these would
Yeah,
be third and fourth year, advanced, senior level art students.
yeah.
And it occurred to me that they would have a lot to gain by having some of these experiences right in place on the land that we work on in the Arboretum, and gain some basic nature literacy and some experience. And I think, bringing students doing these kinds of activities over the years, you've taken us hunting for bugs and, practicing field entomology, and
Yeah,
we've gone mushrooming and
it's always a great class. You have the greatest students.
let me see if I can figure out how to change so here you are. One of the great and most popular activities that you lead among my students is bird banding. And this is a conservation activity. Maybe can you explain what we're doing here?
Yeah, so what we're doing there is we have just caught a bird in one of those traps that's up underneath the bird feeder. And then what we do is we go inside and we put a band on it. So we end up we put on it's a band that's used throughout the world. So bird banding is something that happens all over the world. And by banding a bird, you suddenly know who that individual is if they're ever caught again. So you can learn things like migration patterns. You can learn like ages. You can learn about weight. Fat deposition during migration. There's all kinds of different things that happen when you band a bird, and it's just holding a bird. Like you can see just the wonder there in that one picture of holding on to a
Yeah.
bird is a pretty special thing. And something that I try and do here is not, even though a lot of the stuff that I teach is biology, I don't restrict it to biologists. I'm happy for any class to come out here and learn this stuff, because I think it's even more, it's teaching the converted is great, but teaching the people who aren't converted yet, I think is even more important, because they're the ones that this experience could change how they look at the planet and maybe make them a little more keen to be an environmentalist, or to at least, realize that their own actions are affecting things around the world. So, yeah.
For me, I agree with you completely. The students might think they have a sense of nature based on some things they saw on TV, or, their
Yeah.
own limited maybe sense of things in their backyard. Over and over again, I've had students say things to me, when we learn about plants, they say, oh, it used to just be just green. And then they start, realizing, they start differentiating and things come alive for them. But with the bird banding, the way that you let students hold the birds finally and release them, like I can't tell you how emotional that is. I mean, you've seen it, right? But I see it in my students. And again, I ask them, have you ever held a bird? And by and large, they've never been that close to a wild
Right.
bird in
Yeah.
their entire lives. And it's really moving for them. And I think that's what I wanted to get to a little before I show you some things we do when we go back to the studio, the kinds of things that artists make of this knowledge and these ideas. One of the important things I think that arts practitioners, writers and artists bring to conversations around nature and the environment and climate is a whole set of tools that maybe scientists aren't technically allowed to use, right? We can use feelings, and we can use our, awe and wonder. We can even use our amateur ignorance. Sometimes we can explore the mysteries in all kinds of ways. And I'm going to show you the next one. Wait. So I think like some of these feelings, for example, that are generated with these experiences speak to how the work you do and then the work artists do, with that material of experiences and feelings, can make us obviously care about things in the world, and certainly
Right.
can contribute in broad ways to, how we respond.
Well, I think something that's really important is that you have to, sometimes, to make the best observations, not having a background of knowledge is better for that, because like you said, there's, I mean, it's almost like there's an innocence in observing something for the first time. And so I often lead hikes with people who have never really looked at anything before, and then they notice something that, I've been looking at that for 30 years and I never noticed that, but they notice it because it's their first time looking at it. And I think that's something that, especially, artists can bring to this type of conversation is they're seeing things in a different way that may actually, show a really meaningful relationship that hasn't been considered before.
Absolutely. I know that in birding, certainly amateurs contribute significantly, not just to the,
Yes.
enjoyment and leisure, but to conservation and research on birds and things. But I think you're right. People who come from another discipline outside of science are not burdened by some of those, very established ways of working, ways of seeing, some of those assumptions and the history, right? So we come with different assumptions and history, and we bring our bodies and our own unique perspectives, and we're allowed to work with that. We're allowed to be biased, we're allowed to lie, we're allowed to have fun,
Yeah.
it's a whole different set of tools.
Yes,
So
that's true. Yeah.
yeah. Another thing I think that's also important about this conversation across disciplines and bringing artists out there and participating in some of the activities you lead is it also gives them a sense of belonging out there. Like most of them have never been to the Arboretum, and we just walk
Right.
across campus and they've never been there, and they've never, planted things, and they've never held birds, and they don't really feel like they belong or are a part of nature and the earth. And I keep thinking of, you may have read Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's the plant ecologist and a member of the Potawatomi Nation, who asks her students, if they love the earth. And the students all say, oh, of course we love the earth. And then she asks them, does the earth love you? And the students are confused and despairing, and they're sure that all they are to the earth is just a horrible blight. And she talks about how urgent and essential it is that students know they're loved by the earth in return, and that this reciprocity, this relationship, this kinship, this feeling of belonging is like the first and most important step to living in a more harmonious and sustainable, happy, healthy way in the
Yeah.
world.
Well, and you have to remember too that the natural world is going to give back to everyone who explores it too, right? Like think of the inspiration you can have for any art piece by being more connected to what really is the most beautiful thing on our planet, right?
Yeah.
And being able to see all of this life interacting and growing and working with, like, whether the climate in a regular sense or a climate change sense, it's stuff that if you can go out and explore it, it's going to inspire you and be something you can internalize that will then of course come out again when you're actually being creative.
Hmm. And for better or worse, right? And so I just wanted to show you a couple of artworks just to give you an example, because you've taught me so much over the years. I'll show you a few things that artists do with this kind of knowledge and experience. And so I
Okay,
thought you might
great.
be curious. And if you don't know some of these artists already, I don't know if you can see this. Your arm might get tired, Chris. So I'm just
Okay,
gonna.
I'm leaning against the thing. We're going to give it a
This
break
is
soon.
a feat of endurance. That's another trope of performance art.
We did have a tickety land on my hand while we were switching across. And I'm like, of course you came while, yeah. While it was,
I just wanted to show you, I pulled out a couple of artworks that I keep returning to over the years and that I always show to my students, because, we go to the Arboretum and we have some of these, nature lessons, and then we come back to the studio and say, okay, what do we do with these places, these feelings, these materials, these creatures that we've come to encounter? And so I show them examples like these artworks, and we talk about the ways artists expand our understanding of nature broadly. And so on the right, hiding in the corner, is a wonderful Manitoba-based artist, Aganitha Dick. I don't know if you know of her works. Have you ever seen these sculptures?
oh, that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, she's really, her practice is really extraordinary. I understand that she's developed too much sensitivity to the bee stings in the last few years, so she's not able to do this work anymore.
Mhm.
But for many years, she collaborated with beekeepers and was putting like human-made objects into beehives. And so she talks about this work as a collaboration with bees. And it's really extraordinary. Like, she started with these kinds of porcelain European figurines, showing idealized, refined, affluent lifestyle of, European rich people. And she would put these kinds of objects into the hives. She would have multiple colonies of bees work together, like, really negotiating with the practices of beekeepers and with the bees to sort of solve these sculptures. On the right, I don't know if you can see in the corner, she put a wedding dress into multiple bee colonies. And so the bees built up the honeycomb, which is what they do, around all the forms of these objects that she puts in.
Wow.
She put in hockey helmets and hockey skates.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get to the next one here. I love these figurines. Bees, of course, fill up all the space, all the gaps that are in their colonies. They fill up with comb in order for them to maximize the area to store honey and lay eggs and brood. And so, it's a very beautiful series of sculptures that has this evidence of like human culture, our idea of aesthetic production and our ideas of beauty, and then she's kind of putting that in dialogue with the ways that bees build. And she talks about it as if they're very conscious collaborators, and it's sort of an interesting body of work to look at and to think about, and to sort of come up with some of those questions about the agency and authorship of the bees, about this relationship across species. And Aganitha Dick also talks about putting like our systems, evidence, and our constructions and systems into the bees' culture, and let them try and produce their systems around ours. And so it's this kind of material dialogue across cultures, and that's what these sculptures are. Have you seen? You haven't seen these?
No, I haven't seen them before, but I especially like the sort of the social aspects of being human and the social aspects of being a bee. It's kind of a cool collaboration, right? Because we're both social and have a hierarchy, and sort of like everyone's got a job to do, and it's neat to combine the two. That's pretty cool.
I'm also a beekeeper too. You might know I've been doing it for the last 11, 12 years. And one thing I've learned from beekeeping is like when you focus really, really close on honeybees and on their culture, you learn a vocabulary to talk about, like they're so connected to agriculture, to social organization, you can talk about the monarchy, you can talk about sex and reproduction, you could talk about dancing, right? Like bees, again, starting from this small place, they're connected to so many significant subjects across, all disciplines, all aspects of life. So I wanted to show you another piece around birds. This is an American artist, Mark Dion. I don't know if you know of his work, but he's well known for his work with birds. And this is from a piece that he made called The Library for Birds. It's from 2016. And so in the museum, he has this aviary, and in it is a tree, and all over the tree are bird books. And so here they are all around on the floor, and the birds live.
I have that one and that one and that one.
And the funny thing about this, it's kind of a wonderful tongue-in-cheek piece, that this is a library for birds, but of course the birds don't read any of the books we write about them. They don't know, they don't know their own names. And Mark Dion talks a lot about how nature is socially constructed. Our birds are socially constructed. Like these are ideas we have about them. And I think that's another crucial role artists play, is to kind of remind us of the limits of our knowledge. Sometimes the scientific, objective kind of knowledge, can be closed to this idea of so much that is mysterious and unknown. And
I constantly talk to students in hikes where, as a scientist, I know things and I've read things and I've seen things, but there are other things that have happened in my time in the natural world that are not as explainable as they should be. And while some people may just disregard that as a mistake, I never do, because there's more complexities than we could ever possibly imagine. And it's, just things we're always finding out more. So even just the intelligence of fellow creatures on the planet, we've always dismissed their intelligence, but it's the more science happens, the more we realize, whoa, like that was a smart thing to do. That wasn't just, that didn't just happen. Like the bird or the squirrel, like they figured that out and did something about it. So yeah, it's very important not to, well, like I love the science part. It's very important to not let it take over an experience that you might have.
And I think too, a piece like this speaks to that in that, the multiple kinds of intelligences, and the birds may not share ours, but they have, another language, another culture, another set of references.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of an absurd piece, this library for birds. And the birds, poop on the books and and land on them. The birds are using the books, but in their own way. And
Yes. Oh, that's pretty
that's a
interesting.
piece by Mark Diane. I thought you might enjoy this piece. This is a piece from the late 90s, an early piece by an artist I'm a big fan of now and ongoing, Nina Kachadurian. And so this is a piece called Nature Drag. And so it's another piece with bugs. She coaxed some caterpillars with some honey to stick to her upper lip, and a very kind of spontaneous, playful piece.
Yeah.
While it seems, a funny kind of, quick to apprehend piece, I think she's playing to a significant extent with this idea that nature, we get the nature we want. We tell stories about nature and what's natural. And, she describes this, she says, cross-dressing, an act that's generally thought of as highly unnatural, transpires here using entirely natural materials. She sort of like games these systems that we might take for granted, certain stories about how things are in nature, and queers them and manipulates them and shows how easy in a way it is to do that. I think pieces.
This is my own creation. So.
That one's.
I have had many fuzzy caterpillars crawl across my face, but the eyebrows and mustache are actually from
On purpose, or?
Yeah, oh yeah, on purpose. Yeah. But, there's nothing like making people comfortable by giving them something that they find creepy and having it in their hand or crawl across their nose or sit on their shoulder. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think pieces like these where you this playful kind of engagement with animals and plants and insects and things, they also reveal too how much what we think of as a bird or a caterpillar is also very much a reflection of our ideas, our values, our myths. It's a story about ourselves. And I think in a previous conversation, I heard Catherine Bush talk about, we don't have an environmental problem, we have a human problem. And so this work that I think arts practitioners do to look at the problems we have are the ways to contribute to, expanding our understanding of a climate emergency and responding in a wise way.
Yes.
So I'll just show you two more pieces.
Okay.
This is also by Nina Kachadurian. And this was a piece I saw as a sculpture student many years ago in the 1990s called Spider Web Repair. I can just imagine works like this make an entomologist cringe. So the artist made this little kit of red thread in different lengths and some white glue. And she thought, why don't I go and be helpful? There are all these torn and broken spider webs in my yard. And so she went around the yard and stitched the broken spider webs back together. Can you only imagine, Chris, like what happened once she did this?
Yeah. What happened?
Well, the spiders came and meticulously removed all of her repairs and dropped them on the ground. And so
yes, yeah, they're probably like, what? We're supposed to be making this as something that the bug won't see.
Right. I mean, this is like a clear example of misreading another culture, a clear example of helping where help is unwanted and causes more harm than good. And so, a larger metaphor, again, for ideas we have that, determine how we interact with others and with care for the planet, that might be destructive and do more harm than good.
But she probably learned a lot from doing it. And I mean,
Mhm.
one thing, how difficult, like it probably took her forever to do all of that.
Oh, I
And yet a
think it was
spider
a
just
gesture of
poops the,
care.
has the stuff coming out of her butt, and she makes that whole orb web, in an hour or two, and it's perfect, right? So,
Yeah.
we think we're so amazing at what we do, but you know, we're not like using our butts to create something like that. And the spider does it every day, right? Like every day it makes that web so it can get some food. Um,
Yeah.
it's sort of it's sometimes humbling for us to be able to try and do something like do make a spider web, or even something we do with students sometimes is try and get them to build a bird nest out of
Mhm.
sticks and little fibers and that type of thing, and then it has to hold eggs, and they realize that this is actually really hard to do. But a robin has no trouble going out and doing it, or
Yeah.
that chipping sparrow did it in 4 days, and it's perfectly wonderful, but we can't do it with our own two hands and make it effective. So
Yeah.
um, I think that's a really important thing for people, is to realize that a lot of humans have, obviously it makes sense that we have an anthropomorphic view because we're humans, but that's not necessarily a good thing when you're trying to look at nature and realize, well, we're not the best. We
Yeah.
think we're the best, but we're really not the best when you
And I
think,
really
when you just look
appreciate
around.
you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you saying that because I think that's what this piece is about. It's about our
Mm,
failure to relate. It's about,
yeah.
you know, being humbled, and, an expression of different intelligences and being awed by that, as well as, knowing our limits and, imagine the usefulness of some humility, instead of arrogance around there. And I think
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
another thing artists bring and demonstrate, like with a project like this. And, in the spirit of also you were talking